Binding vows are considered by all Jujutsu users to be one of the essential tenets of Jujutsu sorcery. Binding vows are essentially contracts that an individual can make with oneself or another person. The act of abiding by the rules and restrictions agreed upon in these contracts can result in a greater power or the achievement of a goal, but breaking a binding vow has uncanny repercussions. As we said before, there is two types of binding vows: vows with oneself and vows with others. We will start with oneself vows. There is 11 known of them. First one is revealing one's hand, a binding vow that increases the user's cursed energy output in exchange for vocally divulging how their cursed technique functions. Skilled practitioners can increase the effectiveness of their techniques as well as mislead their opponents on how it works. Over time, a binding vow used by Kento Nanami that limits the amount of cursed energy he can access to about 80 to 90% while on the clock working for Jujutsu High. Once his normal shift ends and he begins working overtime, Nanami's cursed energy increases dramatically. By invoking overtime, Nanami is able to utilize 110 to 120% of his maximum power. Miwa's binding vow. Most beginner sorcerers can only use simple domain by making a binding vow. In Miwa's case, if her feet move from the point they're at when the technique was activated, the simple domain ends. Mahito's binding vow. Mahito imposed a binding vow on his instant spirit body of distorted killing form that increased his toughness in exchange for being unable to metamorphosize himself using idle transfiguration. A separate binding vow is imposed on his elbow blades and head tendrils that allows him to freely change their shape. Never swing a katana again. A binding vow Kasumi Miwa made when attacking Sudogeto during the Shibuya incident, to enhance the strength of her Bato sword drawing by vowing to never swing a katana again. Kinji's binding vow. To survive the steam explosion caused by Hajime Kashimo's electrified cursed energy, Hakari made an impromptu binding vow that shifted the cursed energy, protecting his left arm to the rest of his body, saving himself at the cost of his left arm. Sukuna's first binding vow. In order to bypass the activation conditions of his world-cutting dismantle and launch it at Satoru Gojo, Sukuna made a binding vow that further complicated its conditions for all subsequent uses, requiring the addition of chanting incantations and directing the slash's trajectory with a third hand. Sukuna's second binding vow. By changing his domain expansion's hand sign and applying curse techniques and barrier techniques through a part of his brain undamaged by unlimited void, then including imprecise elements and improvised binding vows, Sukuna was able to activate Malevolent Shrine without any decrease to its range or output for 99 seconds. Sukuna's third binding vow. To make Divine Flame more effective, Sukuna made a binding vow that forbid him from using it against multiple opponents unless inside his domain. In return, his domain's technique is expanded and allows him to imbue all the pulverized matter within it with Divine Flame's explosive cursed energy, turning the dust particles into thermobaric explosives that are detonated when ignited by Divine Flame. Boogie Woogie. After replacing his lost left hand with a Vibroslap, Todo is able to perform 50 swaps per second. Through a binding vow, he can limit the number of swaps per strike of the instrument, which expands his Boogie Woogie's range and allows him to select multiple targets in return. Yuji's binding vow. With a binding vow, Yuji narrowed the target of his dismantle to the boundary between an incarnated cursed object's soul and its vessel's soul. In exchange, the technique is especially effective at separating souls compared to his punches, making them deadly to an incarnated sorcerer. Now let's move to the binding vows that made with others, and there are 5 of them. The first one is Sukuna and Yuji's vow. When Yuji's body was deceased, Sukuna proposed a binding vow that would allow him to heal in exchange for allowing Sukuna to take control for 1 minute whenever he said a keyword, enchain. He also promised not to kill anyone during that time on the condition that Yuji would forget about the vow. After Yorozu reveals herself to Yuji and Megumi, Sukuna activates the binding vow by saying enchain, which grants him complete control of the body. Afterwards, he rips off one of Yuji's fingers and transforms it into a cursed object, force feeds Megumi the finger, and transfers his consciousness into Megumi. Kokichi and Mahito's vow. A contract between Mahito and Kokichi Muta for Muta to act as a double agent for Mahito and Sudogeto. Mahito agreed to heal Muta's body with idle transfiguration in exchange for cooperation and information on the condition that Mahito would not lay a finger on anyone from Kyoto Jujutsu High. Wee Wee and Mimi's vow. Wee Wee has a contract with his sister Mei Mei where he agrees to limit his cursed energy until she gives him permission to use Jujutsu. This stems from his own desire to please his elder sister. Kenjaku and the ancient sorceress's vow. Kenjaku revealed that the cursed objects he had his marked non-sorcerers ingest were what was left of the sorcerers he made binding vows with a millennial ago, and reveals that the binding vows became null after he obtained Suguru Geto's body. At the end of the Shibuya incident, he remotely casted idol transfiguration on the marked non-sorcerers to adjust their brains for sorcery and give them strength as vessels. Later on, he broke the seal on the cursed objects and incarnated 1,000 sorcerers from the past to start the culling game. Yuta and the higher-ups vow. In order to become Itadori's fake executioner, Yuta Okotsu was forced into a binding vow with the Jujutsu higher-ups where he was sworn to kill him. He then ends the binding vow when he does kill Itadori, but heals him with reverse curse technique in the very moment he does kill him, resurrecting him in a sense. Before I wrap this up, tell me about your favorite binding vow in the comment section, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Here is a video you may like. It's a scenario about Yuji having a heavenly restriction like Toji. I hope you like it and see you later, my friends.